Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Madam President, I'm pleased to announce that our bipartisan bicameral negotiations on defense spending and other priorities have yielded a significant agreement. I want to thank my friend, the Democratic leader, for joining me this afternoon and for the productive discussions that have generated this proposal. The compromise we've reached will ensure that for the first time in years, our armed forces will have more of the resources they need to keep America safe. It will help us serve the veterans who've bravely served us. And it will ensure funding for important efforts such as disaster relief, infrastructure, and building on our work to fight opioid abuse and drug addiction. This bill is the product of extensive negotiations among congressional leaders and the White House. No one would suggest it is perfect, but we worked hard to find common ground and stay focused on serving the American people. First and foremost, this bipartisan agreement will unwind the sequestration cuts that have hamstrung our armed forces and jeopardized our national security. Secretary Mattis said, quote, "No enemy in the field has done more harm to the readiness of our military than sequestration." For years, my colleagues on the Senate Armed Services Committee, led by Chairman John McCain, have spoken out about these damaging cuts. In the face of continuing and emerging threats, these cuts have left us unable to realize the potential of our missile defense capabilities. They've whittled down our conventional forces, laying an undue burden on forward deployed personnel and their families. And they've shrunk our fleet to its lowest ship count in nearly 3 decades. We haven't asked our men and women in uniform to do less for our country. We've just forced them to make do with less than they need. This agreement changes that. In addition, this bill will provide for our returning heroes. Too often, underfunded, overcomplicated bureaucracies fail to deliver the care our veterans deserve. The Trump administration and Congress, thanks to the leadership of Chairman Isaacson, have made important progress for veterans in the past year. This agreement will expand on those steps. This agreement will also bolster our ongoing national struggle against opioid addiction and substance abuse. It will fund new grants, prevention programs, and law enforcement efforts in vulnerable communities all across our country. It also provides funding for disaster relief efforts. Last year, powerful storms crippled Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands and damaged mainland communities from Florida to Texas. Thanks to the efforts of members such as Senator Cornyn, Cruz, Rubio, and others, this bill will get more help on the way. And the agreement will clear the way for a new investment in our nation's infrastructure, a bipartisan priority shared by the President and lawmakers of both parties. This bill does not conclude the serious work that remains before Congress. After we pass it, the appropriations committees will have 6 weeks to negotiate detailed appropriations and deliver full funding for the remainder of fiscal year 2018. But this bill represents a significant bipartisan step forward. I would urge every senator to review this legislation and join us in voting to advance it. I particularly want to thank my friend, the Democratic leader. I hope we can build on this bipartisan momentum and make 2018 a year of significant achievement for Congress, for our constituents, and for the country that we all love. Now, on one final matter, as I've said publicly many times, our upcoming debate on DACA, border security, and other issues will be a process that is fair to all sides. The bill I move to, which will not have underlying immigration text, will have an amendment process that will ensure a level playing field at the outset. The amendment process will be fair to all sides allowing the sides to alternate proposals for consideration and for votes. While I obviously cannot guarantee any outcome, let alone supermajority support, I can ensure the process is fair to all sides, and that is what I intend to do.
Madam President.
The Democratic leader.
First, let me thank the Republican leader for his comments and his work these past several months. We have worked well together for the good of the American people. We had serious disagreements, but instead of just going to our own separate corners, we came together with an agreement that is very good for the American people and recognizes needs that both sides of the aisle proffered. I'm pleased to announce that we have reached a 2-year budget deal to lift the spending caps for defense and urgent domestic priorities far above current spending levels. There are 1 or 2 final details to work out, but all the principles of the agreement are in place. The budget deal doesn't have everything Democrats want. It doesn't have everything Republicans want, but it has a great deal of what the American people want. After months of legislative logjams, this budget deal is a genuine breakthrough. After months of fiscal brinkmanship, this budget deal is the first real sprout of bipartisanship, and it should break the long cycle of spending crises that have snarled this Congress and hampered our middle class. This budget deal will benefit our country in so many ways. Our men and women in uniform represent the very best of America. This budget gives our fighting forces the resources they need to keep our country safe. And I want to join the Republican leader in saluting Senator McCain. We wish he were here because he has fought so valiantly and so long for a good agreement for the armed forces. The budget will also benefit many Americans here at home. Folks caught in the grip of opioid addiction, veterans waiting in line to get health care, students shouldering crippling college debt, middle-class families drowning under the cost of child care, rural Americans lacking access to high-speed internet, hard-working pensioners watching their retirements slip away. Democrats have been fighting for the past year for these Americans and their priorities. We've always said we need to increase defense spending for our armed forces, but we also need to increase the kinds of programs that the middle class so needs and depends on. It is our job as Americans, as senators, to make sure that middle-class people can live a life of decency and dignity so that they can keep in their hearts the American belief that their kids will live a better life than they do. In this budget, we have moved, for the first time in a long time, a good deal forward on those issues. Alongside the increase in defense spending, the budget deal will lift funding for domestic programs by $131 billion. It will fully repeal the domestic sequester caps while securing $57 billion in additional funding, including $6 billion to fight against the opioid and mental health crises, $5.8 billion for the bipartisan Child Care Development Block Grant, $4 billion to rebuild and improve veterans' hospitals and clinics, $2 billion for critical research at the National Institutes in Health, and $20 billion to augment our existing infrastructure programs, including surface transportation, rural water and wastewater, clean and safe drinking water, rural broadband, so desperately needed in large parts of rural America, and energy infrastructure, and $4 billion for college affordability, including programs that help police officers, teachers, firefighters. The deal also boosts several health care programs that we care a lot about in this country, an increase in funding for community health centers, which serve 26.5 million Americans, is included. My friends, Senators Murray, Tester, Sanders, and many others have been champions for these community health centers. I want to thank them for the hard work they put to get this done. The Children's Health Insurance Program will be extended for an additional 4 years. Credit is due to our ranking member, Senator Wyden, for his effort for this extension. American families with children who benefit with CHIP will now be able to rest easy for the next decade. Seniors caught in the Medicare Part D donut hole will also benefit from this bill, which eases the coverage gap next year, helping thousands, millions of seniors afford prescription drugs. We have waited long for this. Rural hospitals that struggle, seniors, children, and safety net health care providers will benefit from a package of health tax extenders as well. On the pension issue, Democrats secured a special select committee that must report a legislative fix to the problem by December 2018. Millions of pensioners, Teamsters, carpenters, miners, bakery workers, and so many more are staring down cuts to their hard-earned pensions. They didn't do anything to cause those cuts. Their livelihoods are staked to these pensions. We ought to make sure that they get every penny they earned. We Democrats would have liked to take up and pass the Butch-Lewis Act. We couldn't reach an agreement to do that, but now we have a process and potentially the means and motivation to get it done. And there were so many senators, led by Senator Brown, who are responsible for this, and I want to acknowledge him and Senators Casey and Stabenow, Manchin, Klobuchar, Baldwin, McCaskill, Donnelly, and Heitkamp, who worked so long and hard on pensions. The budget deal also includes long-awaited disaster relief for Texas, Louisiana, Florida, the western states, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Many of these places are still taking their first steps on the long march to recovery. Much of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands remains damaged and in the dark. This recovery aid could not have come a moment too soon. Senator Nelson worked very hard for both Florida and Puerto Rico relief, as did so many others in this chamber. I'd also like to thank our ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, Senator Leahy, who worked so diligently with his staff and his ranking members on these issues, as well as Senator Murray, who's been our beacon on health issues where we've made real progress today. The budget deal is a win for the American people. It will also do so much good for our military and for so many middle-class Americans. And finally, consign the arbitrary and pointless sequester caps to the ash heap of history. And a final point, Madam President, our work here in Congress on this budget deal between the Republican leader and I, between the Senate and the House, was completed without a great deal of help from the White House. While President Trump threatens shutdowns and stalemates, congressional leaders have done the hard work of finding compromise and consensus. It's been a painstaking and months-long process. It has required concessions, sometimes painful, by both sides. But at the end of the day, I believe we have reached a budget deal that neither side loves, but both sides can be proud of. That's compromise. That's governing. That's what we should be doing more of in this body. And it is my sincere hope that the Republican leader and I will continue to work together in this way to get things done for the American people. Now, of course, we must finish the job. Later this week, let's pass this budget into law alongside an extension of government funding. I hope the House will follow suit and President Trump will sign it. I also hope that Speaker Ryan will do what Senator McConnell has agreed to do, allow a fair and open process to debate a Dreamers bill on the House floor. This budget deal will be the best thing we've done for our economy, our military, our middle class for a long time. I yield the floor.